This video is sponsored by the Fighting Fantasy Heroes Frontier campaign, more on them later. From the moment you roll the first dice in a session of Mork Borg, the world is destined to end, swallowed in an eternal darkness that you cannot stop. You cannot fight this end, you cannot delay it. You and everything you hold dear will rot and turn to black sludge beneath Necrubal as the world trembles. So, here we are. Finally talking about the game that people have been hounding me for years to talk about. And as you can see, I have made it through this process completely mentally sound. This video isn't sponsored by Free League, but they did send me a copy of Mork Borg along with a bunch of other books to check out, but they don't get to see this video before it goes out and they don't get any editorial, just like anyone that sends me anything. Part 1. The Vibes. This isn't a review of Mork Borg per se, because, well, I haven't actually run Mork Borg. I know, the drama, right? Why hasn't he played the game? Why won't he run a campaign? That idea is what we call a hook. And hopefully, in the next few minutes, I'll pay that off. Or maybe I won't. Now, it's impossible to talk about this product without talking about its vibes, which are immaculate. Every element of this book absolutely oozes vibes. The back cover advertises it as a doom metal album of a game, and that descriptor really does fit super well. As you read through the Mork Borg book, it's impossible not to imagine your character picking their way through the ruins of a dying world, coming across the bodies of other fallen adventurers, or descending into the dark passages beneath the world in search of some fabled treasure. Mork Borg's central premise is that it's set during an apocalypse, which is a narrative space that I really enjoy. We see a lot of fiction about preventing the apocalypse and a lot of post-apocalypse fiction, but we don't get a lot of fiction set during an ongoing apocalypse. In fact, I'm so intrigued by this premise, running a campaign during an apocalypse, that I've done it. During my second campaign with my current group, I ran a campaign in my homebrew nation of Ashk, a desert setting, and about halfway through that campaign, the players managed to unleash a demon and start the apocalypse, and the second half of that campaign became them trying to prevent the end of the world. And therein lies my biggest problem with Mork Borg. It's too grimdark. Early in the book, you're introduced to the calendar of Necrubal, this method by which you determine when the world will end. Every dawn, the GM rolls a dice, and on a result of 1, they bring about a misfortune, which is like one of the 7 plagues. Some of these are things like flies and wasps filling the sky, while other things have the sun setting never to rise again. But on the 7th of these misfortunes, the world ends. The game and the lives of your characters end here, and the text tells you to burn the book. And look, you can choose what die size to use here from D2 up to D100. So it could be hundreds of sessions before the world ends, but it is inevitable the world will end. I talk a lot about tone and intention on this channel, and Mork Borg is a fundamentally hopeless game in my opinion. No matter what you do, ultimately your characters will die and the world will end. It's just a matter of time. And for me, that makes it a game that I have zero interest in running a long-term campaign in. See, I told you we'd circle around for that payoff. Now, this is absolutely a personal choice, and you might feel differently, but I absolutely need the stories I tell to have an undercurrent of hope. I am more than willing to play and run grimdark settings. I love horror as a genre, but without that undercurrent of hope, it just feels like I'm playing through one of those grotesque torture porn stories, and that is not my vibe. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Anto, you're a GM, you can just change the setting to be more hopeful. You can do anything, dude. You're a talented and handsome game master. And to that, I'd say, thank you. But also, while I know that we as the GM can change anything that we want, I also think that there's some real benefit in playing a game to its stated intention in the text. Most games are designed with an ideal tone and genre in mind, and the more you move away from that, the more the system starts to kind of tear itself apart at the seams. You start out with a system that promises The Expanse, a dramatic and serious space exploration epic, and end with one of the worst episodes of the original Star Trek series, watching guys in terrible costumes grunt around the California desert. it. Personally, I found Mork Borg to be too dark, even for me. And I am a fan of GrimDark, but the whole time I was reading this book, I just kept thinking how miserable I would be running a long-term campaign set in this world, because that default state is one of hopelessness. The world will end. The mechanic for this is really cool, with you choosing different die sizes depending on how pressing the end of the world is, and I think there's some excitement to be had in this mechanic as a player, but the fact remains that if you play a Mork Borg campaign, eventually the world will end. It's inevitable. And that level of hopelessness is just not my vibe for long-term play. If you're a fan of Mork Borg and other old school games, there's a good chance you'll be familiar with the fighting fantasy books by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, which is why I'm really pleased that today's video is sponsored by the Fighting Fantasy Heroes Frontier campaign on my Mini Factory. This campaign brings a selection of heroes and villains from the Fighting Fantasy series to digital STL miniatures for you to home 3D print. And it also gives you an adventure, the Halls of Death, which features all the minis of the campaign as NPCs and villains. The campaign is live right now and is running until December 11th, so if you're looking to add some nostalgic flair to your next adventure, check it out at the link below, and thanks again to My Mini Factory for supporting the channel. But speaking of vibes, every spread in this book is gorgeous. I don't need to look to know that I've opened a gorgeous page. And the book itself is incredibly well produced. As a vibes book, it is brilliant. But as a rules reference and as a tome for reading, it really suffers. And that's what I want to talk about next. Part 2. This book sucks to read. Because while the book is visually gorgeous, the way it delivers information into a parsable format is just awful. The end pages are laid out in a way in which gives information clearly, and the adventure at the back of the book is formatted well, with clear hierarchy and lots of clever formatting to highlight important information, but the rest of the book is actually quite difficult to read. Every spread is a wildly different design, and there's lots of white text on black background and pink text on white background, and switching between all of these can cause some pretty heavy eye strain. Headers use a bunch of different fonts, many of which I found to be nearly indecipherable because they all use that old world medieval style. And while it really executes the vibe the designers were going for, it's an accessibility nightmare. I handed this to a couple of my neurospicy friends and they all said the same thing. There's no way that they could read this and retain any of the information within because of the way it's presented. Fortunately, there is a free bare bones version of the rules that is presented in a much more plain text format. And while this is available in print, it's not easy to come by and is often out of stock. If you make it through reading this book, or more likely, I think, if you have someone guide you through your first couple of sessions, Mork Borg looks like it will be a fun, rules-light, fantasy, brutal romp. Part 3. The game itself. In combat, the monsters don't typically roll dice. The players roll to attack the monsters, and the players roll agility to defend against monster attacks. I'm a big fan of this asymmetric type of rules design because it makes combat move really quickly, and it also means that the monster stat blocks are really simple and easy to design and read. You've got their hit points, their morale, a classic of old school D&D, which I absolutely love and steal from my games all the time, the damage of their weapon, because remember, they don't roll to hit, the players roll to defend, and then any special abilities that they have, such as the Goblin, which has a difficulty range of 14 instead of 12 for its attacks and abilities. You also have some notes on pieces of monsters that you can harvest in exchange for gold. This is something that I always love to see, as it's one of the most commonly requested elements in any game, so having even a simple form baked in from the start is great. Overall, I think if you were to make the argument that Mork Borg is more style than it is substance, I think that that would be fair. It is deeply and inextricably linked to its style, but it executes that style really well if it's your kind of thing. The core rules themselves are fairly basic, and I think it's no wonder we've seen endless forks of taking the Borg format into basically all other genres under the sun. And I understand why there's a real desire to play this style of game, but with a different tone. For me, I can completely understand why the people that love Mork Borg go absolutely crazy for it, but it is not going to be my go-to gritty, dark fantasy system anytime soon. I'd love to know what you think down in the comments below. Tell me about your experiences playing Mork Borg down there. And if you think that I'm wrong and should absolutely run a campaign in this hopeless world, tell me that too. If you want to keep watching, check out this video on Shadow Dark, which is another more grounded, gritty system that I do really enjoy. But until next time, happy gaming.